Psalm number 29. Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders, the Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon to skip like a calf and Sirion like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth and strips the forest bare. And in his temple all cry, glory. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as a king forever. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. May the Lord add his blessings upon the reading and hearing of his word.
Okay, so Psalm 29 is immediately jumping off the page to be a little bit different than some of the Psalms that we've looked at. Psalm 23 stands out in my mind this summer as the Lord is my shepherd, shall not want. And then we get to Psalm 29, it's like ascribe to the Lord the glory to his name, and he shakes and he thunders and he makes the forest rumble out from there, right? So Psalm 29 is a psalm that immediately shifts our thinking. Who is this God? I was listening to a podcast this week, and I listen to a lot of podcasts, but it's just amazing sometimes how this lines up because this interview was with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's an astrophysicist. He's a very smart guy. I love hearing him talk. He explains things that are way over my head, like very simply. Maybe you're familiar with his work and have heard him before. On this podcast, I've listened to several interviews with him, and I'm like intrigued by him. He grew up in a Christian home, but he said like as a child, like he real quickly moved away from the Christian faith because it didn't have the answers that he felt like science had for him. And as he navigates today, there's been like a little shift, I think, that I've heard. And he's a self-described agnostic, but he asked the very question that I think probably some of us have asked, and it forces us to ask as we read this psalm. And it's this, like, why should a God that is like all powerful, why should we give him glory? Why is that necessary? And I was just so happened to be listening to this interview with him this week, and I'll literally just give you the quote from it. As the Stephen Bartlett, the interviewer, he's like asking him like, what do you think is the point of life? What does this all boil down to? And Tyson starts talking about religion immediately in that answer. He's like, well, if you're religious, you would say this. And he says why he has a hard time accepting that. Here's what he says. He says, that's a little odd. There it is. It's a little odd to me because if I created a universe, I would not need people to praise me. That just feels weird. I would just create it and have fun. Let me work on the next universe now. Personally, I wouldn't feel that need. So it's odd that an all-powerful, all-knowing entity seeks your submission and obedience, and it's just that I've never fully wrapped my head around that idea. So that's a good question that he's asking. Why is it that God's okay with us giving him glory? Why is it that even he is asking for it at times, it seems? Why would God ask for it? And so I hope in Psalm 29 we can answer those questions and even answer the question of what is glory and why is it needed and why would we give it to God? Because as you think about those questions, if I stood up here today and I said, hey, please say everything good about me before I talk, that could get weird. It does seem weird. Like, why? No, you would leave the church, I'd hope. So what is it about us, like saying, God, we give you glory? All right, so that's what we want to answer today as we look at Psalm 29. I'm going to give you three parts of this psalm. It really does break down pretty easily in those three parts, verses 1 and 2, and then verses 3 through 9. Let's put that on the screen, and verses 10 and 11. First, we're going to see glory in heaven, then glory on earth, and then really this glorious King who sits enthroned in the last two verses. Let's go through each of those movements. First, this glory in heaven that we see taking place. David says, ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings. The word ascribe is to give, to point out. And he says, it's interesting because he says it to the heavenly beings first. He doesn't say, all the people of the earth, listen up, all you nations, praise God. He says first to the heavenly beings. If this was literally translated in the Hebrew, it would say all the sons of God. This is all the realm of the spiritual, all those who could be in the council of God, as Psalm 82 and 89 speak of. This idea of these spiritual beings that God has created, as they see him, he's saying, ascribe to him glory. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. And then a third time, ascribe to the Lord glory due his name. And there's sort of a progression that takes place in this psalm. First, it begins with these heavenly beings, and then we're going to see it move out into the earth, and it will move to the mountains and to the desert. And there, though, in these first two verses, it's going to start in heaven. As David says, ascribe the glory due his name. This is one of the first ways we answer the question of, like, why is it that we give God glory? And that's because it's not us saying, okay, God, we know your ego needs a little boost right now. You might say that to me. We don't say that to God. David doesn't say here, hey, everybody praise the Lord because he's a little down right now. The glory due his name. And so we aren't making up things to say to God. This is deserved praise. David isn't asking heavenly beings to pretend that God is glorious. He is. They're just simply acknowledging what is true about him. So when Tyson is talking about God, he's picturing people praising God in a way where it's, sort of inflating God's ego. Like every time we sing another worship song, God just feels a little better. And that's not true. These heavenly beings are praising God, and they're giving him the glory that's due. I want you to picture, maybe this will be helpful as you think about this. Picture going to the Grand Canyon for the first time. I've never been. Anybody been to the Grand Canyon before? Okay, we've got some people that have been, right? You can picture stepping out and seeing this. All right? Would anyone need to coach you on what to say? Right? Like if hey, I heard you're going to the Grand Canyon next week. When you get there, make sure when you step out and you see the view that you just go, wow. No one has to tell you that. You step out, you look, and you go, wow. That's amazing. And you try to take as many pictures as you can. A good example for me, coming back from Japan last week, the captain got on on the intercom, and we were flying in the day, and so we had a little bit of visibility, and he said, if you look to your left, there's a chance you're going to get to see Mount Fuji. And so I was really excited about this. So I the flight wasn't full, so I shift over and try to get over to one of the seats where I can see out the window. I'm looking out the window. Where's Mount Fuji? Where's Mount Fuji? Where's Mount Fuji? And Natalie's not in here. I was hoping she'd be in here. I think she's with the kids, but she was helping me because I kept looking down. And she said, look straight. And there was Mount Fuji. And here's the picture of it. There's Mount Fuji in the clouds right there. That's our wing, and there's Mount Fuji. I'm looking down and where is this mountain? Oh, it's like we're flying at the place where it is, right? And so what do when I see it? I'm taking a picture. I'm posting it on Instagram. Check this out. This is amazing. Because no one had to tell me to do that, right? If you were to go to any great site in the world, if you were to hold a newborn baby, if you were to hear like the most beautiful piece of music played, no one has to tell you what to say or how to react. You just naturally move in that direction. And that's really what's taking place in this psalm. David's kind of reminding us of what our natural response is when we see a glorious God, that we say, you are glorious. You are awesome. And it comes from us. C.S. Lewis struggled with the exact same thing that Neil Tyson did. It's funny. He writes about this in his book, Reflections on the Psalms. And he says, basically, I'll kind of paraphrase him. He's like, I thought of God as like a vain old woman who like needed my applause somehow. And he says his view shifted. And this is the quote. I'm sorry, it's a little small, but here's what he says. The world rings with praise. Lovers praising their mistresses, like Romeo praising Juliet and vice versa. Readers with their favorite poet. Walkers praising the countryside. Players praising their favorite game. Praise of weather, wines, dishes, actors, motors, horses, colleges, countries, historical personages, children, flowers, mountains, rare stamps, rare beetles, even sometimes politicians or scholars. I had not noticed either that just as men spontaneously praise whatever they value, so they spontaneously urge us to join them in praising it. Isn't she lovely? Wasn't it glorious? Don't you think that magnificent? Right? Does that make sense? That when we see something, we don't just go, wow, that's amazing, I posted on Instagram. When you see something that's like glorious and full of splendor, then you're going to punch your favorite person and say, like, have you seen that? Have you eaten there? Have you really like seen what's going on there? We all move in that direction where we are going to, as we praise, bring others into it. And that's what David is doing in this psalm as well, to bring us into it. C.S. Lewis goes on to write in Reflections on the Psalms, he continues that he says, I think we delight to praise what we enjoy because the praise not merely expresses, but completes the enjoyment. It is its appointed consummation. It is not out of compliment that lovers keep on telling one another how beautiful they are. The delight is incomplete until it is expressed. It is frustrating to have discovered a new author and not be able to tell anyone how good he is. To come suddenly at the turn of the road upon some mountain valley of unexpected grandeur and then have to keep silent. So Lewis says, here's how we see this idea where, like, why is it that like we give God praise? Why is it that we give him glory? And he's saying, well, in fact, for us, if we don't yell out praise, it will be frustrating. We don't want to be silent. Our praise is not complete until it is voiced. Wow, God, you are great. And then it is like fully consummated. I think we see these answers from David that tell us why is it that we praise and glory God? Well, it's due his name. It is what he is. In fact, you could think about it like this. If you went to a doctor and the doctor had the help for whatever ailment you had, and he did not give it, or she did not give it, then you would feel like what are you talking about? Why wouldn't you do that? You have the cure. It wouldn't be right. And in the same way, when we come to God, if God doesn't point us to himself to say, I am that glorious, I do have the cure, I am that amazing, then it is not right. It would be frustrating. The word glory that's used in the psalm, it's used 4 times, because it's used again in verse 9, where it says everyone comes together to sing glory, is the Hebrew word kavod. And that word means weighty or like just super significant, right? Glory, anything of glory is going to have some weight. You know, you can figure me out pretty easily. You'll know that I like sports, I like to eat, and I like shoes. After that, like, there's not much there. That's Joel, right? And I can get to know him, but that's pretty much it. With God, though, it's different. There's a weightiness, there's a glory there. I will say a caveat there that like anyone, I really believe the phrase that like any person fully alive is the glory of God. So I do think I take that with a grain of salt. But anyways, God, he's glorious because he's weighty, because there's so much to him. He spoke the world and it came into existence, right? He holds the world together by the word of his power, the scripture says. And what did he create but all these beautiful things and amazing things that we sit back and say, glory. And even an astrophysicist who says, I don't really think there's a God, can say glory to those things, right? So God is weighty. Why does he deserve glory? Because it's due him, because it is true about him. If you think about humility for a second in this discussion, we define humility as not thinking too highly of ourselves. And that's right for us. Romans 12:3 says we shouldn't think of ourselves more highly than we ought. But we are finite. We're dependent. God is not. God is infinitely holy, infinitely wise, infinitely good, the source of all beauty, the source of all truth, the source of all justice, the source of all life. And so he is due that glory because it is true about him. Pastor in Oklahoma, Sam Storm, says it like this: God desires our greatest good, but what greater good is there in the universe than God himself? If, therefore, God is to truly love us, he must give us himself. Right? So God isn't saying, look at me because I need admiration. God is saying, look at me because I'm the source of everything your soul is searching for. One is insecurity and one is invitation for us. So Psalm 29 begins in heaven because I believe, and here's why, this is just Joel's idea, that David starts in heaven because these heavenly creatures know this. They see it. Just like Isaiah, when he gets a glimpse of the throne room and he sees those seraphim saying, holy, 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 holy is the Lord Almighty. And he drops down and he says, woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips. I exist among a people of uncleanness. Like he knows that this God is glorious and there's these angels and there's all this activity and all of it is around this God where everybody's declaring holy, 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 right? And so that is what's happening in heaven. And so David starts there and he's like, here, join with me. Join your voices in the choir to declare to this God how powerful and how glorious he is and how good he is. And then he moves to earth. Glory in heaven to glory on earth. Verses 3 through 9. And I'm going to give you three themes here that take place in 3 through 9. The first is the voice of the Lord. That's repeated 7 times. In Hebrew literature, 7 means completeness or perfection. The voice of the Lord is complete perfection. David paints a picture how the Lord's voice is perfectly authoritatively, perfectly effective, perfectly powerful. And what's remarkable is that creation doesn't simply hear his voice, it obeys his voice. The sea doesn't argue with God, the mountains don't resist. As David describes this scene of like glory filtering down into earth, it's like everything obeys at the command of God just like that. And that's important because in the ancient Near East, you had these various creation stories, and all of them were born out of struggle. They were all battle that came, and that's how things were created. In the scriptures, in the Bible, it's God spoke the world into existence. And it's his word where he says, let there be light, and there was light. Let there be there animals and creeping things. And he says it, and there is. And there's no battle. Creation obeys. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. Did anybody hear the thunder last night? There was some big thunder last night. I know because my kids woke me up when it thundered because it was so loud and it shook our house at one point. And that's a good picture as we think about this God of glory thundering, the Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon to skip like a calf and Syrian like a young wild ox. You picture just like a skittish animal, and that's what he's describing there of these Lebanon and Syrian are these giant mountain ranges full of trees. And they're in the north of Israel. And then he moves down to the south into the desert, into the wilderness of Kadesh. and still, like, it's like just this storm that crosses over the region, and it's God's voice that's shaking and flashing forth fire and all these things. And it's just like these huge parts of this scenery are just like falling back at him, is the picture David's giving. That's really the second theme I want you to see, is the geography, that David's describing these places. We don't understand. Like, when we hear this, we're like, where is that? We're not as familiar with this region, and these people would have been familiar with it. In fact, they would have immediately tied, here's the third theme, they would have immediately tied this psalm to Baal, the god of the Canaanites and the god of many of the people that surrounded Israel. And in tying it to Baal, they would have, like, more than likely, scholars think that some of these phrases that came from the psalm came from a psalm for Baal. Because I'll show you a picture. This carving right here is in the Louvre in Paris, and it is from the city, a city that's now in Syria, or is now modern day Syria, Ugarit, and it is a picture of Baal. And in his hand, he's holding a staff, and he's holding a thunderbolt. Beneath him are the mountains and the sea. And it was said of Baal that he was over the mountains and the sea, and that he held in his hands like the lightning and the thunder, and that he was the God who governed all of the landscape. And if they had crops that year, well, that was because of Baal. And in this psalm, he sort of borrows probably some of the language to say, no, that's not Baal. This is the voice of the Lord. And he does it all by his word, right? He says the voice of the Lord is over the waters. It breaks the cedars. It shakes the wilderness. It flashes forth flames of fire. All the things that would have been attributed to Baal, he says, this belongs to Yahweh. You've been giving credit to the wrong God. And that's why we give God glory that's due his name. We don't give it away to lowercase g gods. We don't want to be praising our intellect, or, like, to bring it back to our lives. We don't want to praise our intellect or what we can accomplish or what we may, like, put our money and our lives towards, those lowercase g gods. We know that all the glory belongs to God as the creator, as the one who's good over all the world. And then one last note on this section. Look at verse 9. It says, and all in his temple cry, glory. For 7 verses, it's the voice of the Lord. And then suddenly everyone else speaks. The only proper response, as we think about glory on earth, the only proper response to God's voice is to hear our voice in response and worship. God reveals himself, and his people respond. He speaks, and we worship. We join that heavenly choir singing glory to God. In fact, you could think of this psalm as kind of, here's the song starting in heaven, and it goes down into earth, and it's even being echoed by all the parts of creation. And it's us there in verse 9 being like us wondering, like, are we going to join in? We're going to sing with them this song to God. And then finally, here's the last 2 verses. This is the final movement of the psalm. We go from glory in heaven to glory on earth to a glorious king. In verse 10, it says, let's put that on the screen. Verse 10, the Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord is enthroned as king forever. The Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace. And so with all of what's happening in the psalm, he comes back and he says, just look. Here's what's happening. God is sitting on his throne. What's that place of power when the king sits and everything is under his control and reign? And before we get to verse 11, to think about that for a second, I want to think about why we need this psalm today. I gave a lot of thought to that this week as I was reflecting on Psalm 29. I thought, we can just so casually go after God. He can become just like another thing we check off our list, whether we're praying or worshiping or coming into like a congregation like today. In fact, if you reflect on how you treat God and how you view God, it says a lot. There are times when we can reflect back and see how we viewed God. We can see we've been quite casual. We haven't seen him like this, as this glorious, full of splendor and majesty kind of God. I think of how we treat him these days, the pictures that people give of God, where he's this nice grandfather who never really confronts us maybe. Maybe he's a cosmic policeman who's just waiting for us to mess up. Maybe he's well-meaning, but sometimes a little bit powerless. Maybe he's sort of like a divine assistant to us, where he's going to help us find a parking spot or pass a test we forgot to study for, or get us out of trouble when life starts falling apart. And what Psalm 29 does is it sort of crushes all those wrong versions of God that we can put in our head. And it gives us a God that's not safe and not manageable and not necessarily predictable. And it's a God whose voice shakes the mountains and strips the forest bare and sits enthroned over the flood. And so instead of us making God into our image, this psalm, I think, helps us put us back in our place, that we're in his image, and to see him correctly. I always think of the Chronicles of Narnia. In them you have Aslan the lion, and the section where he says, he's not a tame lion. It's like that. It's like that. If you're around him for a while, you're going to think he's good, but then he's a lion that roars. And he is good, but he's also a lion that roars. God is not small. He's not merely useful. He's a king. If you look at verse 11, here's what this king, though, offers us. The Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace. It's funny because I don't know why. It's a little weird, but Christmas songs came into my head here. Because in the Christmas story, you have glory in the highest at the beginning, but peace on earth and goodwill towards men, right? And that's what I picture with the psalm of just like the angels announcing Jesus' birth, that glory in the highest, but in it would be peace on earth. And I think of Jesus, the one we ultimately find peace through, the one whose voice called creation into existence, became the Word made flesh, the one whose voice shook mountains, stood silent when he went before Pilate, the one who deserved all glory from us, accepted a cross. And also rebels like us could receive what verse 11 promises: strength and peace. The gospel is not that God lowered his standards, it's that he's a king who deserved heaven's worship. The king who deserved heaven's worship came to rescue a people who had spent their lives worshiping lesser things. And so the question for us is, if angels already know that God deserves the glory, if creation already obeys his voice, if his throne stands above every storm, will we join in singing and praising this God? Let's pray.